almost finished with connective tissues. So the last of the supporting connective tissues that we're going to cover is osseous tissue or bone. And specifically, we're going to learn one of the two slides called compact bone. So you're looking at bone in this slide right here. The cells, most of them, the ones that you're going to label are called osteocytes. This tissue, although it seems counterintuitive, is really vascular. Bone is very, very vascular. In addition, bone is undergoing constant remodeling. Your bones are not done once you are fully grown. They are going to get thicker if you use them more, and you're going to lose bone mass if you're less active. There is a rigid matrix. It's primarily collagen fibers with crystallized calcium on top of it. The matrix is gathered from your bloodstream and also secreted by osteoblasts. So it's collagen fibers with organic salts of calcium carbonate and calcium phosphate on top. And there are actually two different kinds of osseous tissue. So let me introduce them to you. You're only going to learn one slide right now, though. So if you took any bone, let's say we're going to take one of the parietal bones from your skull, what you would see is there's actually two different kinds of bone tissue that make it up. So the periosteum we've already covered, and that would be dense, irregular connective tissue. That's not bone tissue. And then there's this bone that's really dense on the outside, and this bone that's more porous on the inside. This is compact bone. This is spongy bone. Okay, so every bone is going to have compact bone on the outside, and some of them may be organized like this, like a spongy bone sandwich. So the compact bone is obviously going to be stronger, but it's also going to be heavier. The spongy bone will be lighter and not quite as dense, and we'll cover how spongy bone is put together in the next chapter. But let's look at the spongy bone and sort of how it's put together. I'm sorry, compact bone and how it's put together. Okay, so if we go back to this figure right here, compact bone is going to be really, really thick in the shafts of what we call your long bone. And long bones don't have to be a certain length. They're the ones that are making up the vast majority of your limbs. They're longer than they are wide, and they tend to be roundish in cross-section. And so if you took a chunk of that compact bone from there, what you would get is something that looks like this, but I need to orient you to what you're looking at so that you can understand it. So I've got a bunch of straws right here. And what you're actually looking at is these straws would be in parallel. And if they all ran together, this would form like the outside of the shaft of your long bone. But importantly, if I looked at it really closely, I would see that each of these straws is actually a column. Now, these are empty, of course, but these columns are not going to be empty. And so if you look at this picture right here, you can see that it looks kind of like the image that you're looking at. What they did is took all of these columns that make up the shaft of a long bone, and then they did a cross section of them. And then one of these guys right here, is what we are going to draw. This is going to be called an osteon, and to you it's going to look like a series of concentric circles, but what it really is a column that you're doing a cross section of. So let's look at the structures that you have right here with the compact bone. And I didn't put all the details in it right here because it's in your lab manual and I'm about to draw it. So what we are going to do is we're going to draw the compact bone with an osteon. And what I'm going to do is, instead of using one of these that's in your book, I'm going to use a different image and sort of label the parts of an osteon. Let's use this one actually. Okay, so here's an osteon. That is one of those columns that I did in cross-section. The reason it's compact is because all of the columns are going to be really close to one another. So spongy bone, really the difference between the spongy bone and the compact bone is that these osteons or columns are at different angles, so there are spaces between them, and that's how spongy bone is going to be formed. So let's label this one as we go through. All right, so you can draw one of these yourself, or I'm just going to draw on this one for you. Draw on it a different color so that you can kind of see what I'm doing. Okay, let's draw on it in blue. Okay, so this whole structure that I'm seeing right here, which is kind of roundish in cross section, this whole thing is called an osteon. Okay. And you would have tons of osteons in compact bone. And the osteon is going to have a bunch of structures that you're going to be responsible for. First off, in the middle of each osteon right here is what we call a central canal. The central canal usually stains relatively dark, but if it were alive, what it would have in it is blood vessels and nerves. Okay, and then in concentric circles around the central canal, what you're going to start to see is sort of what looks like one layer, then another layer, then another layer. Okay, so these layers from here to here, that layer is called a lamella. That's Latin for layer. Lamellae is plural. Okay, and that layer of bone matrix is primarily made of what we talked about before, what we talked about with calcium crystals and collagen fibers. Okay, at the edge of each of these, I'm going to erase some of this so that you guys can see it a little better. Okay, at the edge of each one of these is where you are going to find these cells. All of these cells that you are labeling here, these are called osteocytes. And since they are sitting in a solid tissue, they need a space to sit in, like the grape and the jello salad. So they're sitting in a lacuna. Okay, osteocytes in lacuna, and again, plural is lacunae. Okay. And then one last little thing that we can talk about is we are saying, oh, okay, well, if the blood comes in here at the central canal and the cells are all the way out here, how do I get my nutrients and waste products to and from the bloodstream? Well, that leads us to our last little thing, which is actually labeled right here. Do you see that? These are little canals. 1, 2, kind of look like bicycle spokes. And they go to and from the bloodstream and the cells, and they allow for you to get nutrients and waste products across a tissue which is relatively solid. And what these are, and again, this one's labeled right here, so I'll just put the label on it. Canaliculi. Canaliculi. I'm going to write it in black for you so that you can see it a little better. Canaliculi. That is Latin for a little canal. Canaliculus is singular and canaliculi is plural. And you have to know all of these structures for both lecture and lab. So this is really one of the more complicated slides that you learn. Okay. And yeah, that's good for that one. And in the last video, we will just do blood, and then I'll give you some study tips for learning connective tissues like I did with epithelial tissues, and then we will be able to move on to the last tissues.